All right. Well, I guess you know what. Let's just go ahead and get started. I see that there's a couple of people, but I don't want to just sit in silence and burn too much more time here. We're 7 minutes after the hour, so I want to thank everyone for joining us today. So this is a little bit different forum than what we typically do. So bear with us, and by all means, provide some feedback and whatnot. We're just trying to provide value to the IT community as well as our clients and potential clients, going forward. So um, the traditional or the way that we set out was to have a three-part quarterly series, and that three-part series included this, which has now become virtual. But it was more of an informal meetup where we get together at a location somewhere, in town, and just have a very, off the cuff conversation. We obviously have a topic and some talking points that we would like to hit on, just to, that's kind of our objective. And obviously going into it, we would want to know what we're getting into. But from there, it's really driven by the participants, and it's a dynamic, organic type conversation. And then from there, we go into a webinar, and each one of these it's like a per month. So it's quarterly. So we do one meeting per month. So the meetup is in month one. The second month is a webinar, and that's where it is by and large a presentation, but we do question and answer, Q&A in the chat, and we try and answer as many questions as we can, but it's more of a deep dive on the topic and the talking points, as well as the discussion that we had during the meetup. And then the third and final one for the quarter is a lunch and learn. That is, the people that have stuck through all three, and now it's become a little bit more intimate conversation. We've gotten through some nuts and bolts. The webinar is more like the education. Now we're going into more like the applicable pieces and parts of the technology topic that we're talking about. So, what does your environment look like? Can we help you apply it? And we bring in a industry subject matter expert on it. And then we have, but that would be the only time that person is live and in touch with the group that we're talking with. So the way that we're differing now, obviously we've all had to adapt to the changes in the landscape that we're dealing with right now, is that we're making it a virtual meetup, but we're also bringing in the industry expert right off the bat, to save everyone's time. So today we're joined by John Heckert of VMware. We're going to talk a little bit about everything virtualization, things that are trending, things that are useful during these changing times. Again, the trending things are more, the hot topics. There's a new vSphere version out. What are people using? What's a top seller right now for VMware as far as people, adapting to the ways that we work today, and just so on and so forth. So keeping it relevant, but also, open and general, so that, anyone that joins the conversation, whether it be a decision maker all the way down to, not down to, but over to, I know we're all in IT and we're all looked down on. We're the first ones to go when it comes to budget now. So just keeping it, over the top, and kind of generalized topics. And then if anyone is interested in having more of a deep dive, that's when we would take that discussion a step further, either a one-off, where we do a one-on-one with you, or another session where we say, okay, I like this topic. We only touched on it for 5 or 10 minutes. Let's do an hour on it, and get a little bit further in detail on those things. So that's the agenda, the setup for today. We can start into introductions. Looking here, just want to make sure I'm not leaving anyone out. Okay. So introductions. I'm Doug Holbert, president of Integrated IT Group. We are an IT consulting firm out of Twinsburg, Ohio. Trusted advisors. There's all the buzzwords out there, but we truly do enjoy working relationships. That's obviously number one, as we get in with our clients, and we work with them to truly understand their environment, their culture, and how they go to business every day. And we facilitate that. We participate in their business, so that way, they're not thinking about technology. We are handling all the technology, and there's no question, there's no distractions or anything like that. And even during this whole, COVID scenario, um, things, in the beginning, it was, we had some speed bumps and whatnot, but we overcame those, and our clients are appreciative of it. And just adapt and overcome is what we're here to do. So we thought it relevant and a good topic, and a good vendor to bring in was VMware with virtualization speak, because virtualization is a lot of where things have gone in the remote workplace. So with that said, that's me. That's who Integrated IT Group is. We're also joined by Cooper Comstock. He is our marketing department, marketing lead. So he's here to keep the discussion in check and keep me in line. We have a few guests here, and we can go around the table here a little bit. John, I'll hand it off to you if you want to introduce yourself, and then we can go through the guests.
Yeah, absolutely. So good afternoon, everyone. Thanks everybody for joining the discussion. So my name is John Heckard. I'm a technology consultant with VMware, and I partner with Ingram Micro as the value-added distributor. My role, I've been covering VMware for give or take 9 years in the industry as of now. Kind of started with VMware on day one, and really here to talk about the entire portfolio. Some of my strengths are their data center and some of the workspace one and application delivery to the endpoints. But I cover pretty much the entire portfolio across the board. In my spare time, quick thing is I'm a huge Bills fan. I'm from Buffalo, New York. So if you guys can give us a little love this season, we're looking to actually win a playoff game this year. So every little bit helps.
How can we virtualize sports? That should be one of the topics.
Oh man, if I could just get a bigger TV in my living room, I would never need to go to a game ever again. Just
there you go.
A little bit bigger.
Maybe that can be an expense. All right. I don't want to pick on anyone specifically. It looks like we have Daniel Hughes. Daniel, if you're there.
Yeah. Yes. Can you hear me?
Yep. I can hear you okay.
Yeah, I'm an application architect with a mid-sized bank in the region, and I'm just looking kind of for background, general knowledge.
Sure, sounds good. Yeah, we appreciate you joining us. That's what we're here for, and hopefully we hit on some topics that you're interested in. And if any of them pique more of an interest, let us know. We can dive into those even more.
Perfect. Thank you.
Marcus Brown.
Yes, my name is Marcus Brown. I'm a director of IT for a local museum, and just trying to stay on top of what's new in technology and stay as current as possible.
Understood. Thanks again for joining us. It looks like we may have had a little bit of a technical glitch, and some people have not been able to join. But let's not stop the conversation. We are going to be recording today's session, and then we can redistribute it. Anyone that's on here right now can obviously go back and listen to it, but anyone who's not able to get on here live today, we can obviously take this offline and have those discussions later on. So without further ado, I guess let's jump right in. So the team over at Integrated and John got together, and we had some discussion on what those topics look like. What's of interest today, what is trending with the COVID scenario, and then what's VMware doing, what's new, and I guess on the up and coming. And that's one of the benefits of these types of conversations, is that we have somebody on the inside that we can, we have him until 3 o'clock, so we can hold him, push him into the corner and tell us what we want to know until he gives. So if anyone has any questions about VMware specifically, please speak up. But a few of those things, so the trending items that we had talked about were the new version of vSphere that came out. It's got a lot of enhancements. We talked about remote and virtual desktops, so remote workplace, workplace one. John, correct me if I'm, is that right?
Yeah, so Horizon being our VDI deployment, and then Workspace One being our holistic digital workspace experience, with some of that stuff sprinkled in there.
Okay. And then just overall, what integrated is seeing adaptation of or adoption of, and we can just go from there. So I guess let's start top level and talk about VMware and the latest software that's coming out and some of the newer enhancements.
Yeah, so as recently as April, so I think it was supposed to come out in May, but we actually GA'd vSphere 7 back in April. So big picture, a lot of the stuff and a lot of the investments, and especially Daniel being an application engineer, to probably play a lot with kind of your workspace and your kind of lane, is around containerization. Now we've made advancements in the platform around better memory usage, better consolidation of resources, better ROI in the platform. Those are all kind of table stakes that kind of get pushed forward or progressed forward with every release of vSphere. And essentially any platform gets a little bit more efficient along the way. We learn more about the technology, develop new stuff. But a lot of the bigger investments, to be honest, are around containerization. And even smaller end customers, the medium and larger end customers, what we've started to see, and you can kind of see a track record with VMware of being a little bit ahead of the curve, because we like things to be production ready when people are ready to adopt it, not they ask for it, then we start working on getting it production ready. So even 10 years ago when I started with VMware, not everybody did server virtualization. People would say, I have a couple of servers, I don't need to run VMs, I don't need to run multiple servers on a single piece of hardware. I can have one server for file server, one for my Exchange server, et cetera, et cetera. And even today, if somebody were to tell you that, they kind of sound like they don't know what they're talking about. Server virtualization has bled into every major customer size, all the way down to the smallest two workloads. Cool, I can still virtualize a single server, put two workloads on it, even buy two smaller servers just to have failover between those servers, and it's still cost effective. So if you look at that same path with a lot of VMware's investments into containerization, us using Kubernetes, we used to have a very large and open agreement with Docker. And now with some of the containerization that's made its way natively into the platform, we're still a little bit ahead of the curve, but customers are starting to research and look at what containerization can do for them to not only make their platform future ready, but to get them ready for the hybrid cloud if that's the way they want to go in the future. One of the worst things we can do is never adopt anything new, and then all of a sudden it's critical we get it and we have nothing ready to start transitioning over to that new space. So around vSphere 7, starting there, a lot of investments around containerization. I think back at VMworld when we had it in California last year before the current climate, and we were all down there now that I think that's even crazy thinking about, I think something like 15,000 or 10,000 people over 2 convention centers. I couldn't even imagine that many people even being located in one spot nowadays. But a lot of the content, the technical tracks, the sales tracks, I think at least half of the keynote speeches covered either one of 2 topics, containerization and the digital workspace, were their key focuses. So containerization, even if you think you aren't ready for it today, I highly suggest you start playing with some open source software, even if you're just doing it in test dev and lab environments. And that way you start getting familiar with it. That way, when it makes sense for you, you've already got some of that skill set. And even if you're adopting vSphere, you already have some of that technology in your platform ready to go. So then, I'll kind of pause there. I don't want to jump into each subject, but we'll open it up to conversation to you guys. What do you guys think? What are you seeing with vSphere and moving up to the latest release? Anything you guys are hearing around containerization and how we can help guide you guys down that path?
Well, I am primarily currently a Microsoft house, so we're not using VMware at all, but I am familiar with it. I've used it in the past. So I'm just trying to get as much information as I can for possibility of switching over to VMware. I know Microsoft has a lot of limitations, have a lot of issues, and VMware is definitely the one that's on the bleeding edge of technology and trying to move this virtualization along. So I'm mainly just here to get information and move it forward.
Thanks for that, Marcus. Anyone else, Dave or Daniel? And you don't have to chime in. Don't feel like you're obligated to chime in if you don't really have anything to chit chat about.
So I did have one question, and I tend to I'll keep quiet until nobody else speaks up, and I'll put in my 2 cents after. So you did mention a couple of things there. One is you know, if anyone hasn't gotten into it, I've had a lot of, people, the actual people in IT, the people doing IT, not necessarily decision makers saying, well, I'm interested, but, you know, I don't have the lab space, I don't have the demo space, you know, I'm not sure that I even have access to the software and everything. I mean, that's available, right? I guess, can you explain how somebody could dip their toes into uh, trialing or kicking the tires on this stuff?
Yeah, so the platform as a whole, so vSphere as a whole is ready for containerization. Even if you're using some of our auxiliary solutions like vSAN and NSX, a lot of them have features built in that are container-ready software. So vSAN can present storage to containers and then actually track that storage when it's inside the container, which is something that was not capable before. NSX is ready for containerized networking and control. So one of the things that you get now, we start talking about certain products and where you get it and where you don't, but essentially you can go to Kubernetes, you can go to Docker, and they have open source containerization ready for you to download. So what I suggest, you know, would be my use case is if you have a demo or a lab environment, or even if you have a small environment, I would download one of these open source containerization tools and just start playing around with setting up a container, putting in a workload, understanding how they work. And then that'll start your skill set when containers become kind of common stakes or common ground across everybody. And if you guys don't know like how far containers have gone, just as an example, it's an anecdote from at least a year ago. I think they're still doing it. I haven't seen anything saying they dropped it, but one of the largest deployers of containers is Netflix. So every time you start a Netflix stream, it actually gets booted up inside of a container. And then when you exit that stream of that specific TV show or movie, the container is blown up, but the platform is still there ready to go. So a
So
lot
that's
of
why
the
they ask you every 10 minutes if you're done watching.
you're sucking up all their container space. They're ready to boot you off and get to the next customer.
They want their containers back.
Right. So I understand it if it's not in your realm today, and really the purposes of this call was not to talk about what you're doing today. I'm more worried about what you're doing a year and a half from now and getting you guys ready to go down that path. Containers are coming, just the way I just talked about the example of server virtualization. A lot of people didn't think they would need it, and now I believe the stat is we're 95 or 96% of the Fortune 500. Like the 500 biggest companies in the world, where maybe like 2 or 3 of them that don't use VMware in some fashion. And
That's
that
impressive.
technology, yeah, and that technology is bled down to even the smallest customer.
Wow. If somebody doesn't have a lab, I know some of the software can be demoed, or there's like a virtual lab in VMware. We've used it internally, engineering wise, you know, in our partnership. Is that available to
Yes.
anyone?
So any technology you guys are interested in, um, we do have hands-on labs. So anybody, all you need is an email address to sign up for an account. Just go Google VMware hands-on labs, and it'll take you to a catalog. Create a quick account with an email, verify the email, and you can type in PKS for Pivotal Container Service. Or you can type in vSphere, vSAN, essentially any solution, but just specific to this. There are containerized hands-on labs available to kind of, if you don't have a lab environment set up and don't want to like install it into production, you can just boot up one of our hands-on labs. They are live environments. And I do believe, you know, pivoting to that, those are also booted up inside of a VMware hosted container service, because it's booting up the whole lab environment every time somebody wants to start the lab. So that's actually another example of containerization, but we do have labs in there for containerization, container ready networking, container ready storage. So if you guys want to get your hands wet and dirty and get into the nitty gritty of some of that stuff, that is available at no charge to anybody to create an account and start playing around with some of those solutions.
Yeah, our guys take advantage of that on a regular basis. Get in there because, you know, they constantly bugging me. Hey, can I get in here and do this and do that? I'm like, on our production stuff, and they're like, yeah, well, you know, it's not going to do anything. Let me just spin this thing up over here on the side. I'm like, no, we're going to go ahead and do that in the lab. So, but very cool resource to tap into, because you can literally play with any of this stuff in there. And that's not a plug by any way. Well, it is, but that was completely unintentional. I was just talking about other stuff, you know, for myself. Like, okay, I want to toy around with this at home, and I don't have the equipment. You know, I don't have any, you know, a server or whatever at home. Just spin it up in the lab, in their virtual lab. It works great. Has anyone been in that? Were you guys aware of that?
I wasn't personally. It's been a while since I played with VMware, but I am definitely interested in endeavoring and dipping my toe in a little bit and getting the experience.
Yeah, so when we do a follow up with all of you guys that joined on, one of the things in the follow up I can definitely include is just a link to the hands-on labs. Like I said, very quick to start an account, and even if you have no vSphere experience whatsoever, or even if it's a couple of years old, you can just boot up a vSphere getting started lab, get your kind of dust off some of that rust. I know I played football in Little League, then a bunch of my friends when I was 28 years old said, "Hey, let's go play football at Kenny Field." I was like, "I don't know, man. It's been a while since I've done this. We need a couple of laps around the block to get ready." But yeah, so those hands-on labs are there for you guys to pick those skills back up and kind of get rehashed into the technology.
I like it. Um, I guess using your slide there, security is one of the biggest, or one of the bigger topics that I've heard at least come across my bow in several conversations when we're talking, 365 or VMware, virtualization, Workspace ONE, any of those is how secure is it? I have all my users, they're three-quarters of them are working at home, and then we have our production or our warehouse floor that has computers out there, and they're all logged in. How do I maintain a semblance of security when the landscape is so broad and dynamic and diverse now?
Yep.
I guess I'll touch on security a little bit there. That would be an interesting topic for me.
Yeah. So security has been, I think 5 or 6 years ago, cloud was the catchphrase, right? Cloud is just put the word cloud behind every single technology word. And that was a conversation topic. You could have filmed a 2-hour webinar and people would have joined it. And now essentially you can attach security to anything and people are interested, because one of the worst things you can ruin in this industry as a whole is reputation, and getting hacked and getting leaking data and credit card records and all those things are things that ruin reputations. I'm actually quite surprised, to be honest, that Home Depot got out as unscathed as they did when they had their hack happen. You didn't see like a huge influx of customers go to Lowe's, but I'm pretty sure if we look in the history, I'm pretty sure Lowe's has had a breach at some point. But security being the number one thing, it's so hard to recover from that broken trust with you and your customer, that something that I have that you couldn't trust me with your credit card information, your social security number, your credit score, any of those things.
I mean,
So
look at
VMware,
something. I'm sorry. Look
yep,
at something as simple as Zoom, the platform that we're using right now. I mean, right off the bat, they got hit, and they had to manage that and show that they were remediating that problem, and then also show how they were going to come back from that. How can we trust you anymore? That's a breach of trust.
yeah,
How many
and I
millions of accounts got compromised? But I mean, they stuck behind it and they said, you know what, we see where we went wrong, and we see what we can do better, and involved the community in making that right. And but it is difficult, and that is true there. um, I'd say VMware and Microsoft are one of the few. I mean, we've all seen the patches and the 0-day vulnerabilities and whatnot, but those come to light, and it's ownership and how that's remediated, and then the forecast, the outlook, looking
yeah,
forward.
and I think what Zoom could do a little better is just at least bold out the part where it says meeting password, because sometimes they make it very difficult to find the password in the invite. Just a thought.
Right. Agreed.
So yeah, so people traditionally, some of the people on the call have a little bit of historical VMware experience. People really didn't think of VMware as a security company even 5 years ago. But if we look at top to bottom where security plays, we have security, and the word we usually use, and it's in that little section there for security called intrinsic. It's built into the platform. vSphere has encrypted vMotion, encrypted virtual machines, so that only the source and the destination server can even look at the virtual machine along the way. It can't be sniffed out of the wire by a hacker. vSAN does data at rest encryption. NSX does microsegmentation and distributed firewalling. Even newer solutions that we've either acquired or purchased, for instance, Carbon Black being our endpoint security solution now, and then even App Defense, which operates on a known good state. We actually take a look at a VM. You say, okay, App Defense, this VM needs to communicate with this web front end over this traffic. Watch it run for a day. App Defense goes, I got it. When you put that VM out into production, if it starts doing something outside of that known good recipe, even if it doesn't even register as a hack, maybe that VM just starts communicating with another VM out of nowhere. App Defense will stop that communication from happening and tell an admin, hey, this VM, this is the recipe. It's trying to do this thing that I don't know what it's doing. You want to take a look at it and tell me if you want me to allow it and add it to its recipe, or you want me to deny it and quarantine it. And those are more proactive approaches to security. So when we look at security across the board, people, like I said, people didn't view VMware as a security company. And now we have our own in-house baked into the platform solutions that secure workload all the way from the back end, all the way to using Workspace ONE to manage the endpoints that people are actually accessing these applications from. So requiring a passcode, geofencing, tracking, all those kinds of things that we're used to talking about with mobility management, we can now do with an end-to-end VMware solution with all those solutions baked to work together, and not what we call creating a hodgepodge of different vendors that kind of congeal to make a solution. We make a holistic solution from the ground up.
Yeah, we sometimes joke internally about every company being a security company because you have to. It's security first now because there's so many people and entities and groups and whatever you want to call the organizations that have so much time on their hands that they just continually try and find the holes in everything. But it's kind of like walk into a customer environment and they say well, you're the IT guy. Hang that TV on the wall. So anything that plugs into a wall becomes IT.
Right.
I think anything that's connected to anything today needs to have a piece of a layer of security built into it. So it's great that this is a large piece, and I think it's interesting to see that even the puzzle pieces that how they're laid out there and cut up, that it's a fifth of that puzzle. So there's almost equal focus on the infrastructure as well as security. I like that.
And I think, I know you guys saw me kind of jump to a different screen, but this is one of my favorite IT cartoons out there. It's the IT guy says, everything works. Why do we even pay you? Everything's broken. Why do we even pay you? Right. So security is that, security is that thing that it just seems like it always falls on it. And, sometimes we don't always have the skills, which is why I think VMware has that value where it's not a hodgepodge of, okay, I have this email tracking, I have this line sniffer one from like Wireshark, or I have these 4 or 5 different security solutions that I think covers me. We have security not only in our portfolio, but part of our platform that really create this cohesive, secure platform across the board. And one of the things so just talking about that app defense real quick, that's more of a proactive support. So I always use this like when I babysit, or if you guys have children, is it easier to tell them what they can do or easier to tell them what they can't do? So usually what they can do is a list of like 3 or 4 things, and what they can't do is a list of about 65 things, and you don't have a creative enough mind to think of the things they will think to do that you didn't say they couldn't do it, so they assumed they could. So that's taking this approach of known bad versus known good, and known good is much easier to protect for than protecting against known bad. So that's just that little example, and that's where app defense and some of these future security solutions, as opposed to just always going off of this antivirus, because antivirus, we call that signature-based security, where it has to be something that, there's a database of viruses that we know about, and we're looking for those signatures. If it's a new virus that isn't in that database, antivirus has a hard time finding it. So that's why we have some of these newer age solutions that take a much more proactive approach to security as opposed to that reactive known bad. So that's just an example of the investments we've made into security, and understanding that is I would say, outside of the current climate and talking about remote workforce, because that's probably the biggest driver. We want to talk about trends a little bit. Remote workforce, getting workers mobile ready is probably the #1 conversation, and #2, right at nipping at its heels, is security.
Agreed. Yeah, and we're seeing the same thing. Does that make sense to everybody? Anybody have questions about either the topics or anything specifically that we just touched on?
I have a bit of a question. You mentioned the idea of proactivity and then mobile workforce. How does that all tie in together, right? In the future, we're all not very sure or confident what may happen in our own workplaces, and what new you know, threats may appear all the time. How is VMware preparing for those right now?
Yeah, so like I talked about, the Carbon Black is considered a next-gen antivirus, anti-malware technology. It was essentially why we acquired it and invested in it. So instead of going off of, like I talked about, old signature, it's all about looking at things that apps shouldn't be doing, regardless of, I don't fully. So essentially, the platform is taking the stance of, even though I don't fully understand what this new process is that this application, this VM, this workload, this device is doing, I know that it's not what I think it should be doing, and it's enough for me to stop it right now, which is not how traditional security has been approached. So which is why we've made the investments in the two key areas, that app defense I talked about, known good versus known bad. So all I have to do is tell app defense, this VM can talk to this web application, the front end, and it can communicate with the database on the back end. Okay, cool, app defense knows it can go do that. I can now walk into NSX and set up a firewall rule, because with NSX, microsegmentation is distributed firewalling, where you could not, in a general sized customer, medium size, say like 50 VMs, you could not buy enough hardware firewalls to control every line of communication across your network. And the flip side of that, one firewall wouldn't be big enough to pass all of the traffic in your east to west internal traffic through a single firewall. It's a lot of things to manage. That's a lot of hairpinning. It's got to be a firewall with enough bandwidth to cover it. You don't know if that firewall is covering everything, et cetera, et cetera. So when we do distributed firewalling in NSX, we're going to have the platform, make the VMs, tell NSX, allow this VM talk to this VM. And if you go up to higher editions of NSX, we actually do context-aware microsegmentation. So not only can we open the port, we can dictate what kind of traffic can go over that port, and we can even dictate certain levels of the version. So like TLS or encryption, if it's not high enough encryption, it's auto-blocked by NSX. So we switch from this all trust networking, we call that the castle approach, where we protect the perimeter. Once you're inside the castle, you can go wherever you want. And we take this zero approach to security, where I'm only going to trust you as far as I can throw you. We call that the hotel example. You walk into a hotel, you check in, you're verified. That's essentially me verifying you coming into my network. Okay, here's a room key. There are 900 doors in this hotel, and this room key only opens up the door to your room. It would be really dumb of a hotel if they gave me a key that opened up every door to every room, which is kind of the all trust. Once you're in the network, I trust you to go wherever you need to, which is how hackers essentially get in. They find the way to get in the right way. So a lot of times that's hacked credentials. There's a real famous hack I can talk about for a second. Back in 2014, there is a government agency. It's called OPM, the Office of Personnel Management. They are essentially the HR arm of the federal government. And they were hacked, and OPM lost, or essentially distributed, 1.4 million background checks of anybody who applied for a government job. That's social security number, fingerprints, financial history, everything that you know sounds kind of shady, to be honest, to apply for a job, how much information they want on you. All of that information went into a file, and they got hacked. Now, you would think I say hacked, which means a guy in a hood and sunglasses sits in front of a computer and bashes 9,000 keys and gets into the network. They literally just logged into a contractor's own data center, found credentials for somebody who was contracted to work for OPM on like a security assessment, and OPM never deleted that person's credentials. They didn't give them they gave them full access, here's credentials, never deleted it. So the hack, which isn't that fancy, which we joke about like, oh, I hacked your Facebook because you left it logged in, and that's not really hacking. That's how simple some of these breaches become. Right, so he went in there, he opened up a domain on the outside of the network and just started transferring files. And what he did was, he was the hacker, they don't know who it was, they never found him, but was so smart that the only security they had was looking at network traffic. So he just transferred a small amount of files at a time, so there weren't these huge spikes in network traffic usage. So that it took him weeks to transfer all the files off, but he got them all off before they ever found them. So that's that reactive, like, once you're trusted, go wherever you want. So with microsegmentation, things like context-aware microsegmentation with NSX and app defense saying you should be talking to this and nobody else, we are not even trusting our own workloads, essentially, because they're all breachable. And I think that's a traditional approach to security. Once I protect the perimeter, I just assume everything else is hunky-dory. And that's just not the way that IT really works anymore. assume that somebody's going to find a way in eventually. What's the adage is you can't pay a security admin and more than he could make like doing black hat. You couldn't pay white hat more than they'll make doing black hat, which is a constant struggle. So I think our approach is transferring over to this zero trust kind of policy of like, even though this workload's even in my own network, I don't trust it. You can talk to him and that's it, and nobody else. And I think that's how VMware is invested in some of these solutions. They've acquired a couple companies that are taking that same approach, and they're pushing out their own solutions that line up with this new zero trust kind of approach to security.
Got it. Thank you.
Security is the pessimist.
Right.
Glass half empty. I don't trust anybody or anything. But it completely makes sense. And that's, just firewalling, the very generic sense of firewalling is you block everything and you only poke the holes through that need through. You don't open everything and just block, China because you know that something bad is coming from there, Russia or wherever, No offense to anybody if you're affiliated with them, but you know what I mean.
Yep.
So, yeah. So how, as far as implementation, this all sounds great and everything, but it sounds like a lot of work. It sounds like, there's a lot of policy. There's a lot of like, what type of effort are you looking at, for the example that you gave earlier, like a 50 VM environment? Is there wizardry in here where you can, check a few boxes and roll out, or is it relatively complex and you need to understand the underlying, principles and the foundation of it? And this is completely open, and I'm being vulnerable here because I don't know it myself.
Yeah.
So this is truly a be aware of question that I'm asking for myself.
Yeah. So this conversation evolves around essentially VMware strategy, and they have another catchphrase they used to use. So we have three different key foundational solutions for the data center. So that's vSphere to virtualize compute, NSX to virtualize networking, and then vSAN to virtualize storage. So what we do is we take all that functionality you have to pay a Cisco engineer $180,000, $190,000 plus 401k match, benefits and everything, and we pull that all into software. We cut the umbilical tied to what the hardware can do, and essentially, even though NSX, we still require a layer 2 switch, just a dumb connection switch, because between all us on the phone, I think VMware has 10 engineers sitting in a back room trying to figure out how to daisy chain servers together with no top of rack switch. But essentially, we still need a layer 2 physical switch at the top of the rack to have servers pass traffic between each other. But all of that layer 3 routing, switching, all of the advanced stuff is done through software and is object based. We don't have to control IP addresses. We don't have to configure access control lists. We go into the distributed firewall engine, which is right in vCenter. So we call that single pane of glass management. You're logging into the same console to manage your server, your networking, and your storage. And you just say web tier VM1 can talk to web tier VM2 through distributed switch 1, and they can use this traffic. Boom, that's a firewall rule. So you don't have to be a high-end security engineer. You have to have some IT skills. You have to understand what's the difference between HTTP traffic on port 80 and then HTTPS over port 443, understanding which ports to open for different kinds of traffic, and all these different things. So I'm not saying anybody who just knows how to turn on Windows can walk up and configure a vSphere environment. But if you have some basic 101, maybe even 201 knowledge on some of these key areas, these solutions were all designed to work together, and they're all implemented with a wizard and a GUI. So you can absolutely strip out anything where you think you need to know how to do command line, which, to be honest, command line will always be a thing because it's easier to script some of these things for especially large end data centers, where if you're deploying 45 networks, instead of doing the GUI 45 times, you just run a script and just hit enter 45 times to deploy them. So do you need some skills? Yes, you need some skills and some know-how in each area. But essentially, even now today, when we talked about hands-on labs, you guys could walk in and do the hands-on lab for NSX, the intro, getting started. You could do the NSX lab for vSAN and do the intro lab for vSphere. and you now have enough knowledge to stand up a basic secured hyper-converged infrastructure with VMware solutions. And the great thing is, like I said, vCenter pulls all of these different interfaces together, and you're all managing it from a single spot. So we call that breaking the silo. And I think one of the hardest things in IT is when trying to point at who's at fault. So like I live in New York State. New York State's a no fault state for accidents. So if two cars bump into each other, if it's not blatantly obvious that it's somebody else's fault, just both people pay for the accident. So it's no fault. You just sit there and do the, I know you can't see me right now, but I'm doing like the point left, point right. It's his fault kind of thing. So that's what IT has always usually been. You know, this workload's not working. vSphere guy, what gives? And he can just say, it's the networking guy. He can't get the network up. The networking guy says, I can't talk to the storage, talk to the storage guy. Well, the way that vSphere has approached that part of it, we've tried to pull everything into the software and into a single admin. So now you have one admin who controls all three major portions of the data center. And with a little bit of a time investment on your side, going through hands-on labs, we do have some classes in VMware. We call them ICM, or install, configure, manage. They do come at a cost. I'll say like list cost is a 1-week class is like $5,000. But essentially we take you through day 0, install, implement, deploy, and then manage it by day 2. So if you take 3 different classes, I think the vSAN one is 3 days, the NSX one is 5 days, and the vSphere one is 5 days. If you want to sit down and like knock them all out at once, you can essentially take 3 weeks of classes and be ready to stand up a secure, hyper-converged, software-defined data center without having to have a PhD in each area in order to implement.
That's awesome. Yeah, and I mean the fact that you can get away with something like that is pretty outstanding. Now there is a level of experience that comes, you know, how do I do this, or what implications does this checkbox have or not have? Those are the things that obviously just come in time, and where, you know, the integrated IT group, and then we partner with VMware, you know, can help with.
Mm-hmm.
But the fact that this can be done, and we fit in any one of those scenarios, so we can be your IT, we can support your IT, or we can manage your IT. So if you have questions, if you need help implementing, or if you want us to implement, you know, we can do all of that. So by all means, I mean, we get behind anyone that can do this kind of stuff, and we love to just, you know, chat about it and talk about our experiences and what's going on out there too. So we're an advocate and we have a passion for IT, and that's why we like to have these types of conversations, is, you know, seeing who's doing what and how are you doing it, and how did you learn about it, and is it working for you? All of those things. So great stuff. So I guess to kind of take a step back here a little bit, I know we went a little bit deep on the VMware offerings here, and this is, you know, it's not meant to be, you know, in any way, shape, or form a deep dive into VMware, but you know, you can see how the conversation, just being dynamic and organic, you know, can kind of go down those rabbit holes pretty quick, which is completely fine. I hope you know, the people on the call today learn something about those things. But are there any other topics, anything more general, anything of interest, anything that you guys are dealing with in your own landscapes, in your own infrastructures that you wanted to ask us about?
I'm not dealing with anything major, but training for VMware, can you walk me through that process? Is there a lot of training facilities, testing facilities to get certified? Can you give me some more information on that?
Yeah. So current climate. So before the pandemic, before COVID, you have 3 options. So there were 2 virtual options and 1 live option. The 2 virtual options were, there's a self-paced one. You still have to like pull up the videos and watch all of the content, and you have to log in and do some of the labs in order to complete it. And then once you're done with that, there is a test you have to go do at a certified instruction center. So we were doing Pearson VUE, and I think they're pretty much national across the board. So I think the 2 tests required to get started are a foundations exam, and then a $250 like 65 question test on the class and some of the content that was covered for that class. Now that's to get the full VCP. That's for the person to get recognized and for your company to say, we have people that are VMware admin certified. You can attend these ICM classes without taking any tests. The tests aren't required, right? So you can, if you just want to give the person the knowledge on the product and the platform and configuring and stuff, they can attend the ICM without ever taking the test. But for 250 extra bucks on top of a lot of those classes with the 5,000, sometimes they include an exam voucher to go take the exam anyway. So that person actually gets that certified piece of paper that essentially goes on their resume. That's the higher end certifications that you want to pick on your resume for your job experience. So those classes are anywhere from 3 to 5 days. The second option for virtual is virtual instructor led, where they, just like we're on a Zoom right now, VMware uses Zoom. They will open a Zoom meeting, everybody logs in, they'll be sent a lab manual, and the instructor will go like 2 hours of instruction. Okay, go do lab 0 and 1, and I'm here to answer any questions along the way. They go back to instruction, back to the lab, and you kind of just do that in a cycle for 5 days through the content. The last one, which isn't really an option anymore, obviously, is in person. So some of these they used to do in person in VMware offices across the US and honestly across the globe as well. So you could sign up and send somebody to an in-person class if they learn better with an instructor in front of them, but essentially everything's went virtual. And then the only thing to rectify the testing is, even when this first started, they just canceled all testing, so there were no VCPs. They actually lifted the requirement for partner program to have a VCP because people couldn't test for it. But now Pearson VUE requires you to install a certain piece of software. I think you have to turn the webcam on, so they have to see you like in the frame during the whole test. You can't like leave the desk to like go to the bathroom without permission, etc. So they do some level of virtual proctoring, and you can actually take the test at home now. So I hope that answers your question, or did you need anything further on the training portion?
No, I think that got me in the right direction. Did you say the online videos are free to access? And
so you can do hands-on lab, and you can go online, and YouTube and VMware has their own channel. Any solution you want to look at adminning and going through vCenter, there are videos up there, but the contents of that class, regardless if you do the virtual instructor led or virtual pre-recorded, those ones you still get charged per seat to get access to those videos, and I don't think you can download them to keep them. So they get you into the streaming platform. You can only stream the videos, and I think you have 30 days to go through the content. It stays open to you when you do that at your own pace training.
Gotcha.
And then if you guys are interested in what these classes entail, I'll just show you real quick for anybody who's interested. If you just go to vmware.com/certification, you'll get to this thing. It'll even tell you certification tracks. So if you come down here, is our 6 key areas: digital workspace, network virtualization, data center desktop and mobility. So if I just hit data center, and you'll see this VCP, just click this guy, and it'll say, okay, if you want the VCP and data center for 2020, here's the 4 steps. Gain experience doing vSphere 6.7 or later, because we're on 7 like we talked about. Attend one of these required classes. Here's all the different classes you can attend. So if you have no knowledge, you want to look at an ICM. If you already have some knowledge, you're just looking for the updates, they have fast track. And they have classes that are a little shorter if you already have, so they don't start at like teaching you from ground zero. They start more at like level 5 and then go from there. And some of those classes are a little more truncated in a timetable. But anything you guys want to learn about, it shows you all the different classes they have that are instructor led to help you learn in these different areas. So there's data center, and if I go back, here's network vert. Oopsies. Here's network vert. And then here's all the different network virtualization classes: install, configure, manage, NSXT. We used to be on NSXV, which was meant just for VMware. We have now transitioned to a network platform. So just so you guys know, most of VMware solutions are all designed to work with each other. So for instance, an example is vSAN is for VMware environments. You can't install vSAN on like a Xen environment or a Xen server. But NSX, because of how homogeneous environments are becoming, even if you have a mix of VMware and like Hyper-V environment or VMware and Xen environment, our networking virtualization platform can now transcend across virtualization platforms and even transcend into workloads installed on top of physical servers with no virtualization. So we do some stuff around transport zones, just allowing these things to still communicate where it's not just encapsulated in the VMware environment. So that stretches across platforms for NSX. And here's all the different classes that can help you learn about managing, designing, and deploying NSX as well. So this is open to anybody. You can just type in vmware.com/certification and just see all the different classes. And I think if you click on them, yeah, it'll even take you to a description and show you on VMware's page what is entailed. Here's the objectives, prerequisites, gain some knowledge, and here's an outline of what is covered in the course. So that's freely open information. You guys can just log in and take a look at if you need to build these skills up with you and your engineers.
Perfect, thank you. So we have like 2 or 3 more minutes. If you wanted to touch really quick, I think on our planning call, we did talk about vSphere in the latest version and some of the top level enhancements. I think that would be a good thing to touch on, just to sort of wrap up and take us back up to the top, unless anyone has any other questions. Just gonna, I'd say, use up the last couple of minutes that we have here. We want to be respectful of everyone's time. So yeah, if anyone else has any other questions, drop them in a chat or speak up. Otherwise, I think we could probably just cover vSphere and then wrap it up.
So yeah, sounds pretty quiet on the question front. So just getting back up to vSphere, I know we talked about containerization. This is just the next level if you're already using vSphere of conversations to have around some of the advancements and just in the platform in general. So some of the optimization. So just a couple examples. Number one is, for instance, load balancing. So traditionally, we've always done load balancing on a VM to host ratio level. So VMs on the hosts, depending on workload, we'll move it around. So a couple of the things we have now built into the platform, depending on other solutions, we actually have now predictive DRS. So it'll actually, if you run the same like batch file at night, I always think of the example of JCPenney. So if they're running a batch file to pull all their receipts in for the day of sales, and it always runs at night at like 8 o'clock at night, predictive DRS will actually load balance the cluster before that workload starts, knowing it knows it's going to start at 8 o'clock. So it will proactively load balance the cluster to handle that load and then rebalance it when it's done. So that's one of the advancements. Another one is host-based load balancing, or VM-based load balancing. So traditionally, load balancing has always been done on a host level, meaning we want each host to carry the same load. Well, maybe we have one host configured a certain way to handle the database workloads, and we can prioritize certain workloads going and being on certain hosts, depending on some of these more advanced load balancing rules I can apply to my environment. We have increased our memory and our CPU usage and efficiency. And the last thing that I'll say is for application acceleration. As we know, the rule of affinity in virtualization and IT, the closer two things are together, the better they perform together. If I have a switch on one end of my data center and the workload on the other, obviously the more hops it takes to get to that switch and back, the least efficient my network is, right? So one of the things that we have deployed in vSphere 7 and increased the hardware support is something called persistent memory, or PMEM. What persistent memory is specific hardware devices we can then install on RAM slots inside the server. So think of all the volatility of RAM and how much you pay for it because of how fast it is. But it's volatile, so you can't perpetually store things in memory. It's just used as a work table. We now have devices we can put in memory slots that are hard drives, where they have all the performance of memory and none of the volatility. Now, obviously, this comes at a cost, right? So performance costs money. But if application performance is of your utmost need, we have features in the new platform that will allow you to increase the efficiency and the performance of storage, because now we take the storage and literally install it next to the processor. So the workloads on the host are right on top of the processor, and the storage is as close as possible to that processor. So we have increased application performance with some of these new features in the platform. So one of the things, if you know, I know Cooper and Douglas were talking, if any of these things piqued your guys' interest, they want to schedule essentially now a webinar to get deeper into those categories and talk more in depth. I have a whole deck on vSphere 7 and what got changed in the platform and what new advancements are coming. So whether you guys want to talk about digital workspace, Workspace ONE, whether you guys want to talk about Carbon Black, you want to see a Carbon Black demo, any one of these areas, just let them know what you're interested in, and be more than happy to then in August schedule out a webinar session dedicated to what you're asking about and guided to kind of give you what you're looking for.
Perfect. Well, I think that's a good overview. I don't want to go too far over. We're a minute after the hour here, so I think we will be wrapping up. I appreciate everyone joining today. I think it was a great session. We talked about a lot. So again, if anyone has any specific topics that they'd like to do a little bit more deep dive on, or have another discussion on, absolutely open to entertaining those conversations for sure. It only helps us all get better in what we do. Again, thanks everyone for joining. John, thank you so much. Very valuable conversation, and all your expertise is very much appreciated. I appreciate everyone for coming out today. Thank you.